And now the exciting conclusion of Perseus Wants a Hug. "Hey, buddy," Perseus asked the monster, "you want to see what I got in the bag?" The sea monster tilted his huge head. He wasn't used to mortals talking to him so calmly. Also, he loved surprises. Perseus closed his eyes and pulled out the head of Medusa. A crackling sound ran down the length of the monster's body, like a lake flash freezing. Perseus counted to 3. He stuffed Medusa's head back in the bag and opened his eyes. The monster had turned into the world's largest sand sculpture. As Perseus watched, it crumbled back into the ocean. Andromeda said, "Can I look now?" "Yeah." "Is it gross?" "No, not really." Andromeda stared down at the huge patch of monster dust swirling in the waves. "Wow, how'd you do that?" Perseus explained about the head of Medusa. Andromeda glanced at the bag hanging from his belt. "Cool. So about these chains," Perseus cut her free. "You want to get married or something?" "Sounds awesome," Andromeda said. "Can I get a hug?" "You can absolutely get a hug." That's when Perseus knew it was true love. They hugged and kissed. Then he grabbed her around the waist and they flew to the city. They landed at the king and queen's pavilion. As you can imagine, a Greek warrior flying out of the sky after turning a monster into dust gets a lot of oohs and ahs. Andromeda explained what had happened and announced that she had decided to marry this handsome Greek prince. "Unless there are any objections," Perseus added. King Cephas looked at the son of Zeus, with his buff muscles and his winged shoes, with his blood-splattered armor and his extremely sharp-looking sword. "No objections," the king announced. The queen gulped like she was trying to swallow a dry scone. "Great," Perseus said. "I want you guys to give thanks to the gods for my victory, okay? And, to apologize for being boneheads. On that rock spire where you chained your daughter, I want you to build 3 shrines. The one on the left should be to Hermes. The one on the right will be for Athena. And the one in the middle will be for Zeus. If Poseidon gets mad about his sea monster being killed, well, those shrines should convince him that this city is under the other 3 gods' protection. Unless he wants a war with them, he'll back off. And while you're at it, sacrifice some cows for the gods." "Cows," the king said. "Yeah, 3 should be good. Now, let's have a marriage feast." The crowd, which had been cheering for Andromeda's death a moment ago, now cheered for her marriage. The king and queen hastily arranged a party at the palace with lots of feasting and clogging and square dancing, or whatever else those crazy Ethiopians did when they busted loose. Queen Cassiopeia spent most of her time admiring her reflection in Perseus's shield, because some people never learn. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy about the marriage. This local rich dude named Phineas had been promised Andromeda's hand in marriage back before the whole sea monster problem. Now that the danger was past, Phineas got angry that his future bride had been given away to some Greek with a flashy sword and a head in a sack. During the feast, Phineas gathered 50 of his toughest friends. They drank too much wine, talked some trash, and decided they could totally take down this newcomer Perseus. They charged into the dining hall, waving weapons and making noise. "Give me back my wife, you scum!" Phineas threw a spear at Perseus, but since Phineas had been drinking, the spear sailed over Perseus's head. "Let that be a lesson to you kids. Don't drink and throw spears." Perseus rose from the table. "Who is this joker?" "That's Phineas," Andromeda grumbled. "What kind of name is Phineas? Sounds like a cartoon character." "He's a local rich jerk," Andromeda said. "Thinks he owns me." "Would it be okay with you if he died, like suddenly and violently?" "I could live with my grief," said the princess. "You heard her, Phineas," Perseus warned. "You and your friends leave while you can." "Scummy Greek," Phineas yelled. "Let's get him." Another piece of advice. "Let's get him" is a terrible thing to be carved on your tombstone as your last words. 50 Ethiopian warriors charged, and Perseus went to work. Did I mention that he was the best warrior in Seriphos? Well, it turned out he was the best warrior pretty much anywhere. He lopped off one guy's head. He stabbed another guy in the chest. He sliced the arms and legs off several others and basically turned the feast into a bloodbath. Phineas bravely stayed at the back of the crowd, chucking spears and missing. Finally, Perseus got annoyed with that. He caught one of the spears and threw it back. It would have impaled Phineas, but at the last second, Phineas ducked behind a statue of Athena. The spear clanged off the goddess's stone shield. "Oh, that's low," Perseus yelled, "hiding behind my favorite goddess." He got even angrier. He killed more guys. Ultimately, Perseus backed Phineas and his remaining friends into a corner. "Give up," he said. "I'm getting tired of this, and you got blood all over my wedding outfit." "We'll never surrender," cried Phineas. His friends brandished their swords, though they didn't look quite as sure about it anymore. "Okay, whatever," Perseus said. "I warned you." He shouted to everyone in the room, so everyone in the room could hear. "Anyone who's a friend of mine, cover your eyes. I'm bringing out the head of Medusa." The smart people all covered their eyes. "Oh, please," Phineas said. "He's just trying to fool us with his lies. That sea monster was probably just a clever illusion he conjured up to make himself look tough. He doesn't really have Medusa's head in his—" Perseus brought out Medusa's head. Phineas and all of his friends turned to stone. Perseus put the head back in the sack and wiped his bloody sword on the nearest curtain. He looked at his new in-laws, the king and the queen. "Sorry about the mess," he said. "No problem," the king squeaked. The queen didn't respond. She was too busy checking out her reflection in her goblet. "Andromeda," said Perseus, "you ready to get out of here?" "Yeah." The princess gave her parents one last contemptuous look. "This kingdom blows." Together, they flew off into the sunset, heading for Seriphos after carefully checking the best route on Apple Maps. At this point, the ancient Greeks and Roman writers added a bunch of side adventures for Perseus. They claimed he visited Italy and a dozen different islands, but I think they just wanted to get in on the Perseus tourism boom, like "Perseus slept here," and "Get your photo taken on the spot where Perseus killed the fearsome warthog of Malta." I don't buy all that. One story even told how Perseus flew into the western edge of Africa, saw the Titan Atlas, who was holding up the sky, and turned Atlas to stone with Medusa's head. They claimed that's where the Atlas Mountains in North Africa came from. I don't buy that either, because 1. Medusa's head couldn't turn immortals to stone. 2. Atlas appears in a bunch of other stories later on, very much alive. And 3. I've met Atlas personally, and he was definitely not a statue. Hard-headed, yes, but not a statue. Eventually, Perseus and Andromeda found their way back to the island of Seriphos. When they arrived, they got the shock even worse than a pack of gorgons. The whole city was decked out with banners and flowers. It looked like someone important was getting married, and Perseus had a sinking feeling it wasn't the king's old friend's what's-her-name. He and Andromeda swooped over the castle walls. They flew through a window straight into the throne room, where a crowd was assembled for a wedding ceremony. King Polydectes stood on his dais, dressed in white and gold, a big smile on his face, and 2 burly guards hauled Perseus's mother, Danae, toward the throne. She was struggling and screamed, but no one tried to help her escape the king's brother. No one tried to help her escape except the king's brother, the fisherman Dictys, who had rescued Danae and Perseus from the sea many years before. As Perseus watched, the fisherman tried to pull off one of the guards, but the guards cuffed the old man in the face and knocked him to the floor. "Stop!" Perseus roared. He and Andromeda landed in the middle of the room. The crowd gasped and fell back. King Polydectes blanched. He couldn't believe Perseus was back, alive, now. The kid couldn't wait another 5 minutes? Also, the king didn't like the look of Perseus's new sword or the bloody leather sack tied to his belt. But since they had an audience, the king put on a brave face. "Well, look who it is," Polydectes sneered. "The ungrateful waif who makes big promises. Why have you returned, boy? To make excuses for your failure?" "Oh, I found Medusa." Perseus kept his voice calm and level. He raised the leather pouch. "Here's her head, just as I promised. Now, what exactly is going on?" It's simple, the king said. Your mother has finally agreed to marry me. No, I haven't, Danae screamed. One of the guards covered her mouth. Some of the crowd, the same ones who mocked Perseus when he left on his quest, laughed nervously. Andromeda slipped her hand into Perseus's. Time to cover up my eyes, babe, because that king over there needs killing. Agreed, Perseus said. Polydectes, you will never marry my mother. You're not worthy of her or of being king. Give up your crown and I'll let you go into exile. Otherwise, ridiculous, the king shrieked. Guards, kill him. A dozen soldiers leveled their spears and formed a ring around Perseus and Andromeda. Don't do this, Perseus warned. I'll turn you to stone. Yeah, right, the king yelled. Bring it on. Which, again, is a terrible last statement to be carved on your tombstone. Anyone who is with me, Perseus yelled, close your eyes now. Andromeda, Danae, and Dictys closed their eyes as Perseus brought out the severed head of the Gorgon. A crackling sound spread over the room. There was absolute silence. Perseus put away Medusa's head. He opened his eyes. The entire crowd, except for his friends, had been turned to stone, which meant the price of marble statuary on Seriphos was going to crater. Polydectes sat on his throne, frozen mid-scream. The guards looked like oversized chess pieces. The snotty nobles who had laughed at Perseus would never laugh at anyone again. That was awesome, Andromeda kissed her husband. Good job. Perseus made sure his mother was okay. She gave him a big hug. Then he pulled the old fisherman Dictys to his feet. Thank you, my friend, Perseus said. You were always kind to us. You're a good man. Now that your brother is dead, I want you to be king of Seriphos. He called out to the throne room. Any objections? None of the frozen nobles said anything. The fisherman looked bewildered. I mean, thank you, I guess, but what about you, Perseus? Shouldn't you take the throne? Perseus smiled. Seriphos has never been my home. Argos is where I was born. That's where I will become king. He left his mom in Seriphos because she had no desire to go back to her childhood home. Can you blame her? He promised to text and Skype as much as possible because he was a good son. Then he and Andromeda flew off to the Greek mainland. As it turned out, Perseus' grandfather, you remember, old Acrisius with the bronze cell and the screaming and the yelling, got advance warning of his grandson's plans. I don't know how. Maybe he had a prophecy or a bad dream. By the time Perseus got there, Acrisius had fled the city. Nobody objected as Perseus and Andromeda became king and queen of Argos. They had a wonderful marriage and scads of children. Perseus gave his magic items back to Hermes, because you can't be greedy about stuff like that, and gifted the head of Medusa to the goddess Athena, who liked it so much she added bronze at the center of her shield, the Aegis, to terrify her enemies when she charged into battle. At this point, maybe you're wondering about the prophecy that started the whole story. Wasn't Perseus supposed to kill his grandfather? He did, later on, and it was a total accident. Several years after Perseus became king, he was attending these athletic games in a neighboring kingdom. A bunch of nobles were competing to show off their coolness and win sweet prizes. Perseus signed up for the discus throw. The old king Acrisius happened to be there. He'd been hiding in the kingdom for a while, disguised as a beggar, but he made his way to the front of the crowd to watch the games because they reminded him of the good old days when he'd been a king, not living in constant fear for his life. Perseus got ready for his turn. If you've never seen a discus, it's basically a 3-pound metal frisbee. The idea is to chuck it as far as you can to prove how strong you are. Acrisius hadn't seen his grandson since Perseus was an infant. He didn't know who the athlete was until the announcer called, "Give it up for Perseus of Argos." The old man's eyes widened. He muttered, "Oh, crud," or maybe something stronger. Before Acrisius could get away, Perseus tossed his discus. A freak gust of wind caught it and hurled it straight at Acrisius, killing him instantly. "Ouch!" the crowd yelled. Perseus felt terrible having killed an old man like that. But once ancient Greek CSI identified the body as Acrisius, and the death was ruled an accident, Perseus decided it was the will of the gods. He went back home to Argos and had more kids with Andromeda. They had such a big family that half of Greece claimed to be descended from Perseus. One of his sons, Perseus, supposedly started the line of Persian kings. One of his daughters, who was named Gorgophone, like, seriously, why? Doesn't that sound like a Gorgon? Why was she named after his emergency hotline? Quick, King Perseus, you've got to call on the Gorgophone. His most famous descendant was a guy named Hercules. We'll get to him later. Right now, let's let Perseus enjoy his happy ending with lots of hugs from Andromeda and lots of little demigod babies. Because I want to prove that Andromeda's mom, Cassiopeia, was not the worst mother-in-law in history. The honor belongs to the love goddess Aphrodite. She made life so tough for a girl named Psyche. Well, if you've got the stomach for fighting dragons, enduring torture, and taking a trip to Hades and facing a herd of killer sheep, read on. But it's not pretty. So, that was the story of Perseus.